Hey everybody, what's going on? Hexlex here. I got another Master Duel video for you all. So today I wanted to talk about a feature that got added relatively recently. Looks like it was just a few weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago at this point. And that is going to be the card report. I've talked about this in some of my more recent videos. Pretty much since this feature got added. I was kind of blown away when it first got put into the game, or that it was announced, because it came out of nowhere. And a lot of people I've noticed have been kind of reacting to this information as though it's kind of just like fun little facts, neat little statistics about the game. But I think this is a lot bigger to have access to this kind of data than a lot of people realize, honestly. The ability to see, for those who don't know what I'm talking about, I can pull up a little example here. Yeah, when you watch my videos or really any replay, you can turn this on for games, but it's left off by default while you're actually playing a duel. But while you're watching a replay, it's left default on. You'll probably notice that certain cards will have their usage rate and or win rate come up, and sometimes occasionally the average number of cards per deck as well. And this is, again, data that I think can be a lot more useful than a lot of people might, or more so than I think a lot of people might have initially thought. I just don't really see anybody talking about like these numbers in any kind of meaningful way. So I figured we could do that a little bit during this video. We could go ahead and talk about some of the rates that come up, what they mean, how this data can be used, and how other card games have made use of data like this to make tier lists and break them down in such a way that it is purely objective and statistical and not opinion-based really whatsoever. So let's go ahead and dive right into it. I want to actually pull up a spreadsheet that I have here, and I'm going to go ahead and link this in the description below as well. This will show, you can see here it is, yep. So these are Master Duel statistics for every card that appears during the replays, during that brief info that comes up. British Piper is the one who is putting all this together, so thank you very much to them. As you can see, they have a nice little spreadsheet here that you can sort by usage rate and or win rate. So we'll go ahead and start with usage rate, although we'll end up taking a look at both when all is said and done. But let's start with usage rate. So it's no surprise that Maxi is the card with the highest usage rate at 87.8%. Although we don't have exact definitions of what these statistics mean, I'm going to operate under the assumption that usage rate means that, you know, X number of decks that are played in Master Duel, X% have this card, and win rate, I'm assuming, is the number of times, or the percent of the time that you win when this card is played. So Maxi, they don't give us the win rate for, interestingly enough, but they do give us a usage rate of 87.8%, not at all surprising, nor is it surprising to see 2.81 average per deck. I'm actually going to talk about this now real quick, because I won't be talking about it much at all for the rest of the video. The average per deck statistic is by far the most useless one here. It could actually be useful, but if you actually look at the cards, like I've gone through this whole spreadsheet, you can scroll all the way down here, but if we actually look at the cards that are, it actually tells us, like, you know, how many copies are used per deck. It's literally always for a 3 of. Like, it's literally always for a card that's played at 3 of, or the most, like, the vast majority of the time at 3 copies. Again, this could prove useful for cards like Infinite Permanence, for example. I would love to see the average numbers of, you know, that card per deck. Same with stuff like Forbidden Droplet. There are, like, Triple Tactics Talent Nuance cards that this info could actually be useful for, but again, Master Duel has not provided us with anything other than like 2.75 or higher for this number, so it's pretty much useless. That is one thing that I do think is pretty interesting, is that they are definitely picking and choosing what information to give us. Even initially, when this update first rolled out, we weren't seeing statistics for cards like Sprite Blue, and then now we are. So it could just be as time goes on, maybe we'll see more and more get added, but it does definitely seem, at least to me, like Konami is kind of intentionally picking and choosing what numbers to show us. But thankfully, we are still getting some good numbers here. Zeus being the second highest is actually a little surprising to me, at least that it's higher up than Imperm and Ash Blossom. I definitely would have expected these two cards to be higher than Zeus, but no. Zeus does have a usage rate of 63.8%. So I'm not going to go through every single like individual card here, but for like staples, I will make note of them. That's why we're kind of going one by one. But as we start to go on, like once we hit tier limit stuff, we'll just talk about tier limits as a whole. But Terraforming, not really relevant anymore because the card is banned, although the 51 and 53.8% usage and win rate respectively is most likely like the vast majority that is tier limits, right? Because tier limits, you know, we see usage rates of like 40, or roughly 43 to 44%. So, you know, that makes sense to see terraforming at 51%, the vast majority of that being tier elements, while there are still, of course, many other decks that make use of terraforming there. Dweller is also going to be mostly from tiers, but again, has some more general applications. Sprite, while technically an archetypal card, does see a lot of generic use, and when you compare it in particular with Gigantic Sprite, which has a usage rate of 19%, compare that to Sprite Elf's 50.4%, we can see that Elf is definitely more of a general use card, and it does have a pretty nice win rate to match here. Alright, so after that we have Shizu cards are like kind of generic. That's why their usage rate is a little bit higher than like the tier limit stuff, because there are like, you know, a lot of grass decks, for example, like to use the tier limit cards. The call by usage rate is actually really interesting to me, because the only reason I think it's so low right now is because tier limit doesn't often use it, but I definitely expect this number to be higher in other metas, and will probably continue to go higher as tier limit is, you know, no longer a tier 0 deck. Like conversely, I think, you know, in the month, like right before this update, we would have actually seen this number be even lower, because so much of the field was tier limits, and call by doesn't end up being very good most of the time when you're actually playing tier limits, not, at least not in a mirror match in particular, but you know, it does, again, make sense that we're seeing it at about this number. Again, just because you got to figure the 44, or at least most of the 44 to 43% of tier limit decks aren't using it. And then there's also just quite a few decks that just don't have room for it as well. Alright, so now let's talk more about like archetypes, right? Tier limits, we've already talked quite a bit about. We've had these numbers for quite a while. Tier limits are pretty consistently coming in at like 43 to 44% usage rate, and then about 54% win rate. So 54%, that might seem low. Like, I know some people, I saw some comments like, how do the tier limit cards only win 54% of the time? That's actually a pretty high number, all things considered. When evaluating win percent rates, particularly for like tier lists or just analyzing, you can even use it to analyze your own personal kind of growth, I guess, in a way. If you like go to data and look at your PvP games played versus PvP games won, you can like crunch that down to like your average win rate. And yeah, 54% might not seem particularly high, but any number above 50% is good, right? Any number above 50% means that the deck is consistently performing above average. And the same can be said for your own personal win rate as well. I mean, if your win rate is literally any number above 50%, like you're going to be climbing ranks ultimately. And you will ultimately get up to Master 1 if you play for long enough with a win rate of, again, anything above 50%. So, you know, when I first started getting into like card game statistics like this, which wasn't even with Master Duel, but with Hearthstone, with HS Replay, which we'll talk about that actually more towards the end of this video, and how that kind of relates to these figures we're seeing here. You know, I was pretty shocked to learn that like a tier 1 deck is one that has a 55% win rate or higher according to, you know, Hearthstone metrics. So, but again, you know, that doesn't sound like a lot, but it is quite a bit actually. So again, it makes sense that we're seeing tier limits at like 54%. Again, if we had actually seen the win rate from the month before these numbers came out, which the other thing is we don't know exactly what, you know, date these figures are relevant. It could very easily be that these are the figures from like the month beforehand, but I would suspect that during tier 0 meta we would see tier meta closer to like a 55% or above win rate. Let's see here. We have, oh, these are just still going by usage rate here. So after tier limit, it's funny because you have like some very widely used staples, then tier limits, and then some more staples that are less widely used. But like a lot of these numbers make sense to me, right? Like triple tack, you know, 39%. I don't know if I could have told you before this update that, oh, triple tack is played in about 40% of the decks, but that sounds right? You know, same with like cross out and all that stuff evenly. Yep. Foolish Burial, Nightmare Unicorn, Dimension Shifter. That'll actually, Dimension Shifter at 20% is like higher than I thought it would be, but not like shockingly high or anything. Gigantic Sprite. So Gigantic Sprite, I touched upon this earlier. Is this really the only Sprite monster that we see a usage rate for? Because I know we see win rate for more Sprite monsters. Let me go ahead and Control F for Sprite. Yeah, here we go. Sprite Pixies, Gamma Burst, Smashers, Jet, Starter. Okay, so yeah. We see the win rate of the Sprite cards, but not the usage rate of the other Sprite cards. That's interesting, but we can presume that they're going to be close to the same as Gigantic Sprite, probably a little lower, because Gigantic Sprite's not like as generically used, but it can be slightly in some decks. So 19% though, that sounds about right. Let's see. The Shadalls, it's interesting that they see use in still 20% of tier limit. I guess that makes sense as well, but that figure seems like it's still a bit high to me. I guess that could just be, you know, what I'm personally running into, but... And then, yeah, at this rate, you know, it's funny because it'll go down to like 13% for poly, and then after that it just drops to like 0.1, and I don't know why it bothers showing like so many usage rates for cards that are so far down. Like, so many, but... Yeah, if the usage rate is less than 0.1%, I'm not concerned about it at all, actually. So I'm not going to bother with any of those. So these are all the most like relevant usage rates, and they're all about what I would expect to see. I think win rate tends to be a bit more of an interesting statistic to observe. So let's go ahead and take a look at this next. Okay, so this is something that might seem a bit odd to see Exorcister at the top of win rate. Like, you would think it would be, you know, like Tier Lament or Sprite in this particular meta, but if you look, we see Exorcister cards, then some Flandreese cards, even a couple of Lyraless cards, and then after that we start to see Tier Laments, and, you know, you might be thinking like, oh, does that mean that Exorcister and Flandreese are better than Tier Laments? Well, the answer is actually no, and there's a really, really long-winded explanation for this, which can actually be found mostly here in this little interesting article here. So this is about HS Replay and Hearthstone, like I was talking about earlier. But this little article, understanding and interpreting HS Replay statistics, can actually be very useful to understanding these Master Duel statistics as well. I will, oops, didn't mean to open a new tab there. I will go ahead and, you know, link this as well. I'm not going to read through it all because, you know, it's mostly about Hearthstone, which, you know, it's not the game that I cover here, but a couple of key points I did want to highlight. Okay, this is important for many, many reasons, not just meta evaluation, but particularly we're talking about meta evaluation. This point here, the skew is simple variance. Some decks just get luckier than others. So, like, I'm not saying that's what's happening with like Exorcister and Flow necessarily, but like that is always a factor, variance and luck in general. But I'm having trouble finding exactly where it is in the article. But really, the idea is that like Tier Limit is an extremely, and Sprite are extremely widely played decks, whereas Exorcister and Flandreese are less played. Because Tier Limit is a widely played deck, it's actually going to have a lower win rate than more specialized decks like Exorcister and Flandreese, simply because, you know, the players who are playing Exo are like Exo-sister players, right? Like, they are usually enfranchised within that archetype. Same tends to be true for, like, Flandreese. And because of that, they are better with their deck. Like, the average Exo-sister player is actually more skilled with their deck than the average Tier Limits player. One also Flandreese player, but, like, Tier Limits player, for example. But that's mostly because Tier Limit is a much more widely played deck. Again, I would love to see the usage rates on the Exorcister cards because, you know, I would be willing to bet that they're less than like 10%. Whereas we saw that Tier Limit cards are like, you know, in the 40s, 43, 44%. So you do have to account for that disparity. Again, you can't just look at the win rate statistic and compare it 1-to-1. There are many variables, which unfortunately I'm not good enough at math to explain most of them. But you like the Zerora, the Magistus Flame, for example, like this has a fairly significantly higher win rate than even the rest of the Exorcister cards. And, you know, the initial thought might be, oh, does that mean that this is actually the best card in the Exorcister deck? No, it just means that, like, you know, more often when Zerora is played, that person is winning the duel. Because, you know, if, for example, your Exorcister Pax gets, like, Ash Blossomed, you're not going to get anywhere near the step most of the time of, like, setting up a Zerora on the field. So, you know, you also have to kind of take that into account, too, right? Like, you might see some cards have, like, abnormally higher win rates than others. Like the Lyraless here, the Promenade Thrush and the Recital Starling. It might seem really weird that these cards have such a high win rate, like even higher than like literally any Tier Limit card. But again, you gotta figure that like most games where these cards are being summoned are only in situations where you are pretty much about to win or using that card very specifically to put you in a winning spot, right? You're not summoning Promenade Thrush the vast majority of games you're playing it in your extra deck, but the majority of times you are summoning it, you are winning, because you're probably using it to specifically win. So that would explain why Exos and Flaunderies tend to have higher win rates overall. Again, just because less players overall are using those cards. Still, you know, we see the tier limit cards and also a lot of the the Sprite cards here. Again, among Sprite specific cards, you know, we see at the top Onibimaru Soul Sweeper has 54.7% win rate. Swap Frog and Ronin have 54.6%, but then it's not when you get to, or it's not until you get down to like, you know, 53, the upper 53% that we start to see, you know, other more typical cards like Melfi Caddy, Sprite Smashers, even like Jet is way down here at 53%, Blue is in red or way down here at 53%. But again, that's not because they are worse cards in Sprite than stuff like, you know, like even the Nimble Beaver here, or like Swap and Ronin or Onibimaru. It's just that more often than not, when you summon an Onibimaru Soul Sweeper, for example, it's because you're going to use it to get rid of something so that you can push for lethal, right? So that tends to be why it has a higher win rate overall than all the other cards. And Blue and Jet tend to get played in more Sprite games than stuff like Swap Frog. By the time you're summoning Swap Frog, you've probably already pulled it with a gigantic Sprite, and then you're just using it to win anyway, So yeah, after that we see, like I said, mostly Tier Lament and, what is it? Oh, Sprite cards. Tornado Dragon being this high is pretty interesting. But again, Tornado Dragon might not be a very popular card, but its effect involves destroying back rows. So you gotta figure, most of the time this card is summoned, even if it's not played a lot, it's going to be clearing a back row so that you can push for lethal. So again, makes sense that a card like this actually has a pretty high win rate. Same with Racefolger, the Desperate Doom Eagle. You know, in Tri-Brigade variants, you don't summon this card often at all, but when you do, it's probably to go for like an access code for an OTK or something, or it's a double its own attack to go for an OTK, or, you know, something like that. So, like, for example, the Crystal Beast Emerald Turtle, I guess that's the usage rate, not the, oh no, that is the win rate. So, it makes me inclined to believe that the win rate statistic actually counts the card being in the deck and not actually played, because Emerald Tortoise is, like, almost never actually summoned in a duel. And I have to imagine if you are summoning Emerald Tortoise, then you're going to be losing most of the time. So seeing Emerald Tortoise with a 53.9% win rate kind of makes me think it might just be the card being included in the deck, but that does also conflict with what I was saying earlier. I don't know, again, I would just love to know more information about these statistics from Konami, but to be fair, at the same time, it is also just like kind of a miracle we're even seeing these numbers anyway. This is not something that most card games will actively share, or like any other card game actively shares, you know? Talking about Hearthstone and HS Replay, right? This is entirely a fan thing. Now, to be fair, it's a fan thing that's been going for, you know, well over, I think, 6 or even 7 years now. Obviously, Hearthstone team is aware of it and they don't mind it, but it's not something that's officially run by Blizzard, by Hearthstone. This is very much something that the fans are more or less data mining. By the way it works is you have a deck tracker in Hearthstone, and that'll keep track of everyone using the deck tracker. It'll track all their wins with all their different decks, and that will kind of all merge and form an idea of what the meta looks like. So again, in Hearthstone, meta is actually a very objective thing, and it's tracked by the overall win percentage of a deck from everyone who's using HS Replay submitting. And that might not seem like a lot, but not only is that thousands of people using this app, it's pretty much all of like the best players, right? Like anyone who's like even somewhat competitively focused in Hearthstone, you know, 9 times out of 10 they're going to already have HS Replay. So it does end up being very good information, but at the same time, because it is, you know, still kind of fan, what's the word I'm looking for? Fan cultivated, I guess. It's not as complete as what Konami is showing us here, because presumably Konami is showing us numbers from all over, like everybody playing Master Duel, which, you know, a program like HS Replay could never gather that kind of information, because, again, ultimately, even though a lot of the, you know, skilled players are using it, it's very much the vast minority of players who are gathering that data there. So I don't know that I really have much else to say about it, honestly. I'm not very good at math, but I do kind of consider myself a bit of a data nerd, so I love to geek out and just gush and pour over information like this. I think it's fascinating, and I think it's definitely worth talking about as more than just like, oh, this is an interesting little fun fact trivia. Again, I think if we had more complete information from Konami in regards to what exactly this data is made up from, and just more complete data from the whole, cards, and for every card and deck type overall, then we could use that to piece together a very much more objective tier list. And again, maybe people who are better at math than me could even take the information we have and pull something together, but I am very much not that person. I think the numbers are neat, but I don't know much about them. So that pretty much covers it and everything I wanted to talk about with this video. Thank you everybody for watching all the way to the end. Let's go ahead and move now to our outro. Alright everybody, thank you so much for watching all the way to the very end of the video like this. That means a whole lot to me. Not just personally, but it's also a great way of supporting the channel as well. If you're interested in supporting the channel in other means, you can of course feel free to comment and or subscribe right here on YouTube. I'm always looking to the comments section. You guys leave some pretty awesome feedback as far as like constructive criticism goes when it comes to deck building, gameplay, channel content, all that stuff. So feel free to leave your opinion down there. I will be sure to take a look at that there. And then subscribing is going to be the best way to get notifications of when these videos drop. That does happen every day, by the way, so if you're looking for daily Master Duel content, you've come to the right place. And there are more places where you can get some daily Master Duel content. If you check out the description below, follow the top link over to my Patreon page. There for just $5 a month, which is as much as you pay for a booster pack, you'll find a lot more value than a pack full of filler over there. We've got some previews for content upcoming here on the channel. We've got some exclusive games that are only posted over on Patreon over there. We've got some Q&As, and then you can also have your name featured in this lovely credit sequence where I thank all of the people who are helping contribute over there on Patreon. It's a huge support to the channel, and it really means a lot as well. So thank you everyone who is donating that is featured here on screen. And again, it's not just a pure donation, you do get some more daily Master Duel content over there just for being a part of the Patreon. But I think that's about all the time that I have for today's video. Once again, I just want to thank you so very much for sticking all the way to the end of the video. Again, it just means a lot, as I do put a decent amount of work into getting these videos out every single day. But that's about all the time that I've got for now, so without further ado, this is Hexlex. I'm signing out, and I hope you have a fantastic day.